At my parents' wedding, I wasn't in any photos. When people asked why, they said, "Unfortunately, she caught COVID and had to stay behind. I took a COVID test and posted the negative result online with everyone tagged." What my parents didn't realize was that their lie would trigger a chain reaction that would expose 25 years of systematic exclusion and ultimately cost them their carefully constructed social reputation. I'm Emma, 17 years old, and I had just discovered that being the forgotten child in a wealthy family comes with unexpected advantages when you know how to use them strategically. My parents, David and Susan, both 50 and 49 respectively, had been together for 25 years but never officially married. When Dad finally proposed on their anniversary in February, everyone celebrated it as this romantic milestone. The timing wasn't coincidental, though. They had always celebrated their anniversary on the day Mom found out she was pregnant with my oldest sister, Diana, now 25. My brother Marcus is 22, which left me as the unexpected addition who apparently disrupted their perfect family dynamic. From the moment they announced the engagement, the exclusion began immediately. Mom asked Diana to be her maid of honor within hours, and Dad chose Marcus as his groomsman the same day. I wasn't surprised initially. Diana had always been the golden daughter, sharing Mom's love for shopping, socializing, and throwing elaborate dinner parties for their wealthy social circle. Marcus was Dad's mini-me, playing football, working on cars, and talking business strategy. Dad even coached Marcus's middle school team for 3 years, something he never offered to do for any of my activities. I had grown up as the odd one out in our affluent household. While my parents and siblings bonded over their shared extroverted personalities and love of entertaining, I preferred reading, studying, and quiet activities. When I was younger, I would hide in my room during their frequent dinner parties, but as I got older, I started participating more, thinking it might help me connect with them. It never seemed to matter. They had their established dynamic, and I remained peripheral to their core family unit. What they didn't understand was that my isolation had made me incredibly observant. While they dismissed me as the quiet introvert, I had been watching and learning. I noticed how they operated their social circles, how they managed their image, and most importantly, how much their reputation mattered to them in their wealthy community. My parents were successful professionals who had built their identity around being the perfect family, and their social standing was everything to them. During the wedding planning, the exclusions became more systematic. Initially, someone suggested I could be the flower girl, but Diana quickly shot that down, saying her 3-year-old daughter would be more appropriate. Then my grandmother suggested I could read a poem or give a speech during the ceremony, but both parents refused, saying they wanted a low-key wedding and didn't think a cheesy and sappy speech would fit their vision. Those were their exact words. I was the only family member who wouldn't have any role in the ceremony. As the planning intensified, I noticed Mom never invited me dress shopping with the other female guests. When they had wedding discussions, I was consistently excluded. I decided to test whether they would notice if I didn't insert myself into the planning at all. I stayed quiet and waited for them to ask me anything about the wedding. They never did. The wedding was planned for Hawaii, an intimate destination ceremony with only the closest family and friends. 3 weeks ago, the day before departure, Mom casually asked if I had my luggage ready because we couldn't be late to the airport. When I told her I hadn't prepared anything, she got confused and then snapped at me for not being organized. That's when I asked the question that made her face go pale. Do I even have a plane ticket? They had bought first-class tickets for Diana, Marcus, and several family friends attending the wedding. They had hotel reservations, dinner plans, and a complete itinerary for everyone except me. Mom tried to downplay it, saying they could find me a low-cost ticket last minute from a cheap airline. But then I asked about having a dress for the ceremony. She had taken Diana and the other female guests dress shopping months earlier, but I hadn't been included. When Dad joined the conversation, he told me to suck it up and said that since I'd never been a girly girl, I could just wear whatever. The dismissiveness in his tone revealed everything I needed to know about how little they valued my presence at their wedding. We got into a heated argument where they called me entitled and accused me of making myself small intentionally so they would forget me, as if that justified completely excluding their youngest child. The argument escalated when they told me that if I was going to keep this attitude, I might as well skip the whole thing altogether. I responded with a defiant, "Fine," and went to my room. The next morning, they all left for Hawaii without me. What they didn't anticipate was how their absence would create the perfect opportunity for me to document their systematic exclusion. While they were posting dozens of photos on Instagram and Facebook about their perfect and magical wedding week, I was taking screenshots of every single post, saving every comment and building a comprehensive record of their public narrative versus reality. The photos told the story perfectly. Every family shot included Diana, Marcus, their spouses, and extended family, but I was conspicuously absent from every single image. When people started asking in the comments where I was, my parents responded with their fabricated story. Unfortunately, Emma caught COVID right before the trip and had to stay behind. This lie was the strategic mistake I had been hoping for. Instead of saying I couldn't come for financial reasons or that there wasn't space, they chose a verifiable medical claim. They had essentially handed me documented proof of their dishonesty, posted publicly for their entire social network to see. I went to a local clinic and got a COVID test, specifically requesting the dated documentation that would prove I was never sick. The test came back negative, exactly as I expected. I took a clear photo of myself holding the negative test result, with the date and clinic information clearly visible. My caption was simple but devastating. Not sick at all, just forgotten. I tagged everyone who had questioned my absence in the original posts, and for maximum impact, I also tagged every single person who had been invited to the wedding. But I didn't stop there. In the comments, I provided a detailed timeline of how my parents had literally forgotten to include me in anything wedding-related until the day before departure, and how they had actually uninvited me when I brought up the oversight. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Most people sided with me, expressing shock and disappointment in my parents' behavior. Others couldn't believe the story and thought there must be more context. But the documented evidence spoke for itself. The negative COVID test, combined with their own social media posts, created an undeniable narrative of parental neglect and public dishonesty. What made this particularly devastating was the timing. My parents were still in Hawaii, enjoying what they thought was their perfect wedding celebration, when their social media feeds exploded with comments and questions about their treatment of me. Their magical week was immediately overshadowed by the public exposure of their parenting failures. The social implications in our wealthy community were severe. These weren't random internet strangers criticizing them. These were their neighbors, colleagues, business associates, and closest friends who had witnessed them lie publicly and then get caught. In circles where reputation and family values are everything, being exposed as parents who exclude and lie about their own child was social suicide. When they returned from Hawaii, I faced a barrage of messages from my family, calling me every name in the book. They accused me of being immature, spoiled, and deliberately destructive. But their anger only confirmed that my strategic exposure had hit its target. They weren't upset about the family dynamics. They were furious about the public humiliation and damage to their carefully maintained image. Initially, I felt satisfied with standing up for myself, but their continued attacks made me doubt my approach. Living in the house became unbearable, with constant tension and hostility. I started second-guessing whether exposing them publicly had been the right strategy, wondering if I could have handled the situation more privately. That's when I decided to call my grandmother, my mom's mother, who lived several states away. Grandma was 77 with mobility issues that made traveling difficult, which is why she hadn't attended the wedding. But she had always been loving toward me and had called out my parents' favoritism in the past, though distance and her health had limited her ability to intervene directly. When I told Grandma the complete story about the forgotten ticket, the lies about COVID, and my parents' reaction to being exposed, she was furious. She immediately concluded what I had suspected, that it was impossible they had forgotten me, and that they had deliberately excluded me from their wedding. She also validated my decision to expose them publicly, pointing out that they had created the situation by lying and deserved the consequences. More importantly, Grandma offered to help me get out of the toxic environment. She told me she had my back 100% and that I should start making plans for my future. She also offered financial support to help me move out and live independently while attending college. During this conversation, I realized that my parents' wealth had always insulated me from understanding my own privilege, but it had also made me completely dependent on people who clearly didn't value me. I wanted to become financially independent, not just from my parents, but generally. I needed to learn to stand on my own. I reached out to my friend Jessica, who was planning to rent a studio apartment near our future college campus. She came from a large family and wanted independence, so she understood my situation. When I asked if I could move in temporarily and pay rent once I found a job, she immediately agreed and told me not to worry about money until I was stable. We both cried when I explained everything about the wedding situation, but Grandma wasn't finished. She called my parents and siblings directly to confront them about their treatment of me. My brother Marcus sent me a half-hearted apology afterward, claiming he didn't know I wasn't included and thought I wouldn't have fun on the trip anyway. He also accused me of posting the COVID test, just to create drama. My sister Diana was less diplomatic, berating me for trying to make public family problems and pinning them on innocent family members. My parents' response was to come to my room and tell me that if I wanted to put this whole issue to rest, I should shut up about it, because it could have all blown over if only I'd kept my mouth shut. When I asked them to leave, I immediately called Grandma back to report their continued dismissiveness. That's when Grandma announced that she and my uncle had bought plane tickets to come see me. I was terrified because traveling is extremely difficult for her health, and I felt responsible for forcing her into this stressful situation. But she insisted she was long overdue for a conversation with my parents and wanted to see me in person. Grandma arrived Monday morning with my uncle, and seeing her at the airport was overwhelming. I broke down sobbing in her arms, hit with everything at once. Gratitude for her support, guilt about her difficult trip, relief at seeing someone who actually cared about me, and anxiety about what came next. She held me tight and kept saying everything would be okay. At their hotel, I poured out everything. Years of exclusion, the systematic emotional neglect, how miserable I felt after the wedding incident, my fears about the future, my desperate need to move out even if it meant jeopardizing college, my arrangements with Jessica, and even my concerns about potentially being an affair child based on the age gaps and treatment differences. Grandma reassured me about everything. First, she confirmed I wasn't an affair child and that both parents had been genuinely happy when Mom got pregnant with me. She explained that the favoritism had started when I was around 3 or 4, when my parents began complaining about having a young child who limited their social activities. They had been able to take Diana and Marcus to adult events, but I required different accommodations that they found inconvenient. My shy personality and tendency to cry easily had also frustrated them, making me feel fundamentally different from my more outgoing siblings. Most importantly, Grandma told me that my parents had saved more than enough money for my college education, and that they were financially well off enough that my tuition had never been in question until now. She promised that if they tried to pull funding as punishment, she would pay for my education herself. She also offered to help with rent and living expenses until I could support myself. Her generosity made me realize how privileged I had been economically throughout my childhood. Despite their emotional neglect, my parents had provided private school education, a generous monthly allowance, and unlimited spending on a credit card they gave me. The isolation had been psychological and social, not financial. Reading stories from others in similar situations made me understand how fortunate I was to have both supportive grandparents and financial resources available. Grandma insisted I accept her help until I no longer needed it, understanding my desire for independence, while ensuring I wouldn't sacrifice my education for pride. We spent the morning recovering from emotional exhaustion, but that afternoon we took a taxi to my parents' house. My parents were shocked to see Grandma and my uncle when we walked through the door. Before anyone could speak, Grandma told me to go pack my essentials while she and my uncle talked to them. I rushed upstairs and could hear them confronting my parents about years of exclusionary treatment. Initially, I heard my parents trying to defend themselves, but eventually they went quiet as Grandma systematically dismantled their justifications. When I came downstairs with 2 packed suitcases and my backpack filled with everything important, I found them all in the living room. Dad was red-faced and Mom was crying like a child. When she saw me, she extended her arms toward me, saying she was sorry, but I responded with, "Save it," in the coldest tone I could manage. Dad said I didn't have to be a jerk, which prompted both Grandma and my uncle to tell him to shut up. I left the house immediately and waited outside for our taxi. Back at the hotel, Grandma told me what had happened during their confrontation. My parents had claimed my college tuition was never in question and that they had been planning to throw me an extravagant birthday party to make up for the wedding situation. They were also supposedly going to give me a car as an apology. Grandma saw right through these desperate attempts to save face. She told them these were obviously improvised promises meant to minimize damage, and that material gifts wouldn't address the systematic exclusion I had experienced for years. The moment that broke my mother, according to Grandma, was when she mentioned that I had even questioned my paternity due to being treated so differently from my siblings. Grandma told me she would ensure my parents made the college payments unless I preferred to cut ties completely and have her pay instead. I chose complete financial independence from them. Although Grandma isn't as wealthy as my parents, she reassured me that everything was manageable and that anything she spent on me would ultimately come from Mom's inheritance anyway. The next day, we met Jessica's parents and looked at the studio apartment we had planned to share. Grandma immediately declared it unacceptable. I had known from photos that it was small and somewhat run down, but in person, we could see water damage, mold in the bathroom and kitchen, rust on the old appliances, and most concerning, the building was street level in a dangerous neighborhood with bullet holes in the walls. Jessica's parents and Grandma agreed to help us find a better 2-bedroom apartment in a safer area. Both Jessica and I would pay what we had originally budgeted for the studio, while the adults would cover the additional costs. While I felt somewhat spoiled accepting this help, the alternative would have been genuinely unsafe. Jessica's parents, who were aware of my family situation, offered to let me stay with them until we found a suitable apartment. This was incredibly generous since Grandma would be returning home in a couple of days. I was moved almost to tears by how many people were rallying to support me when my own parents had shown such indifference. Since then, I've been gradually moving my remaining belongings from my parents' house while staying with Jessica's family. Every time I return to collect items, Mom cries and apologizes repeatedly, while Dad mostly stares silently. When he did apologize, it was vague. "I'm sorry for everything," without acknowledging any specific wrongdoing. My sister Diana called to berate me, saying Mom was a mess and that I was heartless for what I had done to the family. I hung up before she could continue and blocked her number. I was planning to block Marcus as well when I saw he had sent a lengthy message apologizing repeatedly for his role in excluding me and for not recognizing how poorly our parents had treated me over the years. Marcus said he had been doing serious self-reflection since Grandma's call and realized he had been wrong to assume I wasn't on the Hawaii trip because I wouldn't want to go, and wrong to allow our parents to consistently exclude me from family activities. I sent a brief reply thanking him but explaining that I needed space and wasn't ready to accept his apology yet. I decided not to completely cut off Marcus because he had never been actively cruel to me the way Diana had been, just emotionally distant. Keeping one potential bridge to the family felt wise while everything was so fresh and volatile. If he proves to be as problematic as the others, I can always block him later, but as long as he respects my boundaries, maintaining minimal contact seems reasonable. I've also scheduled an appointment with a therapist who specializes in working with neglected teenagers, funded by Grandma's continued support. This makes me even more eager to find employment quickly so I can start reducing the financial burden on her, despite her repeated insistence that she's happy to help. The exposure strategy worked exactly as I had hoped. My parents' lie about my COVID infection created documented evidence of their dishonesty that I could use to publicly validate my experience of exclusion. Their social reputation in our wealthy community has been significantly damaged, and they're now known as parents who exclude their own child and lie publicly to cover it up. More importantly, the confrontation forced the family system to reorganize. Instead of continuing to accept peripheral treatment while financially dependent on people who didn't value me, I now have alternative support systems and a path toward genuine independence. Grandma's intervention provided both emotional validation and practical resources to escape the toxic environment. The long-term consequences are still unfolding, but the immediate results are clear. I'm no longer trapped in a family that systematically excluded me. I have financial support for college and independent living, and I've connected with a network of people who actually care about my well-being. My parents are dealing with the social fallout from their choices, while I'm building a foundation for real autonomy and self-sufficiency. Sometimes the most effective response to family exclusion isn't trying harder to earn acceptance, but strategically documenting the treatment and finding people who will value you appropriately. My parents thought they could continue marginalizing me indefinitely, but they underestimated both my ability to expose their behavior and my capacity to build alternative support systems that would make their approval irrelevant.